VETtalk Radio is proudly supported by the Animal Referral Hospital.
This week.
Is plucking the hair out of your dog's ears a good thing?
Well, the vets themselves were confused for a while, and they used to run around saying to everybody to get plucked.
We've got the lowdown on this ancient art. And what about cats and toddlers?
There's a bit of a myth that the cats will smother the babies. They won't. That was the original explanation of the SIDS.
And are our pets unintentionally killing us?
It migrates around and it heads up towards the eyes, and they burst in through the retina at the back. It's sort of like a bullet going through a piece of metal. It looks just like that.
So what's zoonosis, and just how dangerous is it really?
That sounds like a great story. G'day, I'm Brian Pickering.
And I'm Kay Brown.
All those stories and more right here on VETtalk, with our latest podcast available every Saturday on vettalkradio.com.au. And it's also available free in the iTunes store.
Guess what? Ta-da! We're listed in the new and notable section on iTunes under Kids and Family. How cool is that?
Very cool. Of course, iTunes doesn't have a dedicated pets section yet. Maybe we should all contact them and tell them it's time that pets got the attention they deserve.
Have you ever had a problem with your pet's ears? I know we have. Those little ear canals are a different shape to ours and seem to catch all kinds of nasties and cause more problems than just about any other part of their bodies. Well, stand by, because our authority on all things to do with changes in the pet industry, thanks to her role in running Pets Australia, has just joined us online with some breaking news.
In fact, she's on Skype. G'day, Jo Sillince.
Hello to all.
Now, I wanted to talk about the things that we do with pets, some of the strange things. I actually don't do this, but I've seen my wife, Kay, co-host, hello Kay,
Hello.
go around plucking stuff out of dogs' ears, and it's the most gross thing I could ever imagine. I just go, ugh! Why have we got to pluck dogs' ears and cats' ears?
The new science says that we don't have to.
Oh, okay.
Once upon a time, anyone who saw hairy ears, which is kind of not a disease but it sounds like it, felt obliged to rip it out, and that's why we had such a lot of ear infections.
Is that why? Because, I mean, it is one of the most common problems. Every time the Vet Association sort of makes a list of the most common problems, the good old ear infection is right up there at the top.
Well, the vets themselves were confused for a while, and they used to run around saying to everybody to get plucked.
Really?
And then what happened was there was a bit of a notice that pets whose ears weren't plucked had a slightly lower rate of ear infection. And so then they went and did the science, and they find out that every time you pluck, every time you rip a hair out of a follicle, you actually get a microbleed, which, of course, you know, it's such a small hole, you don't get a lot of blood cells come out, but you do get plasma. And plasma is the best bacterial growth stuff you could ever find.
Aha, it's like a petri dish in your ear.
Absolutely. So any time that a pet had a bit of a bacterial imbalance in the ear, and so you'd madly pluck, and along came the plasma, and those little nasty germs would say, oh, yippee, feast time, and then instantly you'd have an ear infection.
And a miserable dog.
That bit of science has changed the way both vets and everybody else is starting to think about getting plucked.
So,
But we still need to keep them clean, don't we, and use those ear washers and stuff.
Yeah, and I guess that highlights the fact when Brian was talking earlier, he was talking about, you know, getting stuff out of dogs' ears. Yes, you've got to get the grot out of dogs' ears. That's the nasty, waxy stuff and any goop that's in there. The only scientific reason now to pluck ears is if there's a real reason to do so. In other words, if the animal has already had an ear infection and that heavy growth of hair in the ears is exacerbating it, making it worse.
okay, so I shouldn't be plucking nose hairs.
No comment.
Okay. So, groomers. Now, I've seen groomers plucking hairs out of ears. Is that just to make them pretty, or what's that to do? And do they still do it?
Remember that groomers were advised by vets and trained by show people. So, again, some of that is overhang from past science. And when I say past science, that's only 2-year-old science, and it takes a long while to get that message through the community. But we're finding increasingly now groomers not wanting to pluck hair. They're happy to trim it, because some of this hair is so thick it actually gets matted. And so what they do is they trim it off to the base of the mat. But increasingly now we're seeing groomers not wanting to pluck. And I've seen some absolutely horrendous situations where owners or people like that have tried to pluck ear hairs and grabbed too much and ripped half the skin out of the inside of the ear. So,
and probably had their hand bitten off at the same time.
Well, don't know, but it's certainly not a procedure that's without its risks.
Okay. So, no more ear plucking.
You can no more get plucked.
Okay. Ear plucking is out of date.
It is indeed.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I actually got woken during the night by a certain little toy poodle scratching at her ears after she'd been hunting skinks in the garden now that they're awake. And I had to go and get the ear wash and give her ears a wash.
Yes, we'll have to get to the bottom of what's going on with those ears, because she sort of goes from week to week being okay and then not okay and...
Hunting in the garden.
Anyway, that was Dr. Jo Sillince, CEO of Pets Australia, and I think she had some pretty good advice as to, and basically what's going on with ear plucking. Do you pluck your ears?
No. Do you?
No comment.
Now, some time ago, our daughter Caroline adopted a beautiful cat while living in the US and called him Smokey. She spent several years there before returning to Australia with Smokey at great expense. And she got married, had a cute little baby boy. Now, we know that Smokey is a great cat because we babysat him for about 6 months prior to his human brother being born. Now, Smokey went back to Caroline and everything was going well until Bubba Tyler turned into a toddler terrorist, not realising that his love for the cat was totally over the top.
Totally. You should see the video we've got.
Smokey disappears when Tyler comes running. So, when you can't call a ghostbuster, you do need to call a cat expert. And Dr. Kim Kendall from the Chatswood Cat Palace has some top tips to restore peace.
The problem for the cat is that he hasn't grown up with the child. When you introduce cats and babies, there's a bit of a myth that the cats will smother the babies. They won't. That was the original explanation for SIDS. But what happens is the cat can see the growing, going from immobile to crawling to chasing. Unfortunately, all research does show that a cat's least favourite human being is a young male because they just don't stop. They don't understand the subtle signals of stay away from me. And the cat hasn't been able to understand the transition and hasn't been able to create any sort of good relationship because when they're babies, it's a nice, soft, warm spot and the cat can be part of what goes on. And then you get a relationship with it because the cats do treat toddlers and babies as a subspecies. So now all that happens is that when he comes out, no doubt TJ haunts him, tracks him down and thinks, I want to put my sticky hands on and all that sort of stuff. So the cat, whose name is Smokey, has designed his own coping strategy, which is to hide. And in fact, that's not a terrible thing. If you look at what cats do all day, even in this boarding situation here, if they have a place to hide, their stress level actually goes down. It's when they can't hide that they get into trouble. So simple hiding boxes are fine. And then you establish, which is the default that has happened, is that the baby gets locked away at night and then the cat knows it can relax and interact with the people. Cats, in fact, don't interact all the time, all day with anybody because they have to sleep 16 hours a day, especially at 9. That's part of their daily makeup. That's what they do. So although your daughter might be worried about what's going on, it sounds to me like the cat and the kid have made their own arrangements and it's suitable. One of the suggestions I do make if toddlers are particularly persistent and the parent is concerned about damage to the child, because if the cat gets bailed up and hooks out with claws, then some damage can be done. I mean, it's an accident and it was initiated by the child, but nevertheless, a claw in the eye is not much. That's a lot of work for everybody and pain to work through. So what relaxes the owner and everybody else is to actually put a product called soft paws or plastic claw tips on the cat's nails. You glue them on with super glue. They fall off every 6 weeks when the sheath falls off. And that just means that if the cat happens to get bailed up, that one moment of indecision and the child, TJ, just does not give up. And that is so typical of boys that they just don't. Yeah. The baby's safe. The baby's face is safe. And that lets everybody relax.
That's good. And thanks to Dr. Kim Kendall from the Chatswood Cat Palace for some very good advice.
Well, it's good that Smokey can get higher than Tyler can, and eventually, I guess they'll get along. Even though young kids love cats and it all looks very cute for Facebook photos, probably best to just make sure they stay apart while they're young. Let them get to know each other over a long period of time.
You're listening to Vet Talk, and you can listen to each of our podcasts every Saturday, either on the vettalkradio.com.au website, or you can go into iTunes, download it into your iTunes app, whether it's on your mobile phone or your iPad or whatever you don't use.
Whatever you do.
You don't use iTunes.
Not much.
Okay, well, do you know what zoonosis means?
Trick question. Not scared of zoos, perhaps?
Well, if you're like me, I had to actually look up the word, and I found it pretty scary, so we thought we'd find an expert to help explain a little more.
We're joined by parasitologist Dr. David Jenkins from the School of Animal and Veterinary Sciences at Charles Sturt University.
Can you just describe zoonosis, basically? You know, what happens in a person if they get zoonosis?
The dog roundworm, where the person can ingest these eggs that have got larvae inside them. The eggs hatch inside the person, release this larva that migrates around, and it heads up towards the eyes, and they burst in through the retina at the back. It's sort of like a bullet going through a piece of metal. It looks just like that. And that wrecks the retina, and you can get unilateral blindness. And we see a few cases of those a year. Not many, probably 10 to 20 would be the maximum, but for the people concerned, it's a life-changing event,
yes.
not better.
Horrifying event. I didn't realise it was that many because, of course, the doctors would see them, but in the scheme of things, with road accidents and everything else, I guess they're not thinking it's that worrying.
It just things. Zoonoses, a lot of them, and I've worked for many years with something called hydatid disease, which is another one of these worms. It's a tapeworm that infects dogs, and the eggs pass out of the dog into the environment, and classically they go into sheep and form fluid-filled cysts in the liver and lungs, but they can also go into people and do the same thing. And we're seeing, we still see cases of that every year.
Wow.
Probably not nearly as bad as it used to be for a number of reasons, but it's still out there.
Yeah, well, I know well about that, coming from New Zealand, and a lot of relatives on farms, and the dogs regularly, the working dogs, had to get wormed for the hydatid tapeworm. And I did actually see a cyst on one of those livers once when I was younger as well, and they're nasty things. I mean...
Oh, they are. I mean, the biggest cyst that ever was removed from a human was actually, coincidentally, an Otago farmer, a New Zealand farmer from the Otago district, and this cyst had a volume of 50 litres.
Wow. Litres?
Yes.
Holy
it was enormous. This man had a girth, I think it was 178 centimetres.
Wow.
Gosh. And the description of the operation was horrifying. They bailed his abdomen out into buckets on the operating room floor, quote unquote.
Well, I actually come from Otago, so that's very interesting.
Very good Pinots come from that part of the world. So
well, now you're talking...
It is a good place.
Now we've got on to a completely different topic.
They grow everything well in Otago. But the hydatid tapeworm is more for rural dogs, isn't it? But the other worms... Everyone needs to be worried about them, and I do know that this Milbermax survey, Dirty Dog Survey, has done a world of good in raising appreciation that our kids particularly can get it. Dr. Jenkins, thank you so much, and please come back again soon.
I'd love to. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
That was Dr. David Jenkins giving us the lowdown on zoonosis. Did you know he's a parasitologist?
Can you just imagine being at a party and someone says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And they reply, "Oh, I'm just a parasitologist."
Look, can I get you a drink?
Many people think of veterinarians as being just like doctors, but they work with animals.
Yeah, well, I reckon some doctors would say they work with animals too.
Sometimes, especially on a Saturday night. But I do know one vet who works with all kinds of animals, exotics vet Dr. Jayne Weller from Sydney's Animal Referral Hospital. And Brian went along to see just what it is she does on a daily basis.
Do I look really tired today?
Well, you must be tired, Jayne, because you've got so many critters in here.
Yeah.
The exotics ward at ARH. Tell me what you've got.
I'm exhausted. So we've got Otis, who is a ferret that needs follow-up radiographs on his chest because he's got allergic airway disease. We've got Polly, who's a macaw, who we saw a little bit of the other week, who's also got airway disease, and she's got an air sac catheter in. We've got Zazu, who's also a macaw, and Zazu has a broken ulna, fractured ulna, so he's got a bandage on his wing.
And the ulna for
everyone else, yeah. The ulna is one of the bones in the forearm in people, so between your elbow and your wrist, and in birds it's pretty much in the same place.
Okay.
And then we have Fluffles, who has a broken back leg, unfortunately from a cat attack, and so we actually have to amputate her leg. And we also have to remove all her front teeth because she has very awful front teeth, and so she's quite skinny. So she's a big case as well. We've got a little budgie called Budgie who has a testicular tumour, who's in hospital for some palliative care, unfortunately, at the moment. Another rabbit, Tana, who has dental disease and abscesses, so we have to do a dental on her and an abscess removal. Then we have a turtle called Maurice. Maurice is going home today, but he came in dehydrated after his owner was dry docking him because he was unwell a few weeks ago. But he's doing really well, so he's going home. And then a little bearded dragon who had vomiting and diarrhoea 2 nights ago, but is also doing quite well but has some calcium deficiency, so we're treating that at the moment.
Well, we've seen plenty of activities around Animal Referral Hospital. This is the most exciting department, I think, from what I've seen today.
I think so. It's always exciting, always something different.
Good. That was Dr. Jayne Weller from the Animal Referral Hospital. She's an exotics fan. Some of those names were exotic. How about, what was it, Fluffles the rabbit?
Fluffles, and then there was Budgie the Budgie. I got to say, I'd love to hear from our listeners, what is the most unusual name that you've ever heard for a pet?
We named our chooks Aiko and Yoshimi. That was pretty unusual.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And we had Ginger Rogers, of course, because of her beautiful, it looked like a mane, a sort of like a fur coat.
And then Tickety, the other chook.
Yeah. And, so many.
Just goes on. So, yes, as Kay said, if you've got an unusual name for a pet, send it in to us. Tell us. We'd like to find out why you named your pet that, and we'll see if we can get you a prize of some kind. I'm not quite sure
what.
what.
Be able to do that, yeah, some sort of treat.
So, KB, what's been happening in the world of pets and animals this week?
Couple of quick stories for you. This one from Victoria, where a woman called Amanda Boland was issued with a fine of almost $400 after her dog allegedly bit a raffle ticket seller.
Okay.
Allegedly, because Amanda wasn't home at the time. Apparently the ticket seller came along at about 5:30, went into the front yard and was found by Jed the Spoodle, who's missing a couple of front teeth.
Okay.
Apparently no skin was broken, but there was a bite, and the local council, Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, attended and said, well, this is not good enough, and, you have to pay up.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because is the dog on its own property and not off-lead outside the property? It's basically protecting its owners and its house and its own area.
Exactly. Years ago, Cosmo, who's now long gone, bit someone who put their hand through the front gate. There was no fine, fortunately, and the neighbour was actually quite good about it. But it does raise the question of, when is a dog bite a real problem? I think we need to look into this because it could happen more often in future.
It just raises an interesting legal question. Does council have a right to fine somebody for that? If it was off the property, absolutely. Absolutely, no question about it. But it's on the property, so a very interesting legal question. We might try and find a legal-type person who's interested in these sort of areas to come on the show and have a chat about it and see what we come up with.
Okay, another story that is probably a little bit not that unusual for Labrador owners. In the UK, a dog called Rollo, who's a 9-year-old Labrador, has actually cost his owners thousands upon thousands of dollars, because Rollo is an artist when it comes to finding ways to find food. He's worked out how to open the fridge. He's worked out how to get into the glass house to eat the vegetables there. Apparently the only thing he doesn't eat are onions and celery.
Well, that's pretty good, because the celery's not bad for him, but the onions, he's a smart dog.
Apparently he's like the Terminator. He'll eat absolutely everything.
But he's a Labrador. I mean, most Labrador owners, well, certainly vets are going to say, oh, it's a Labrador.
I know, but they've actually had to, they say, puppy-proof the entire house. They've had to put a stairway on the top of the stairs. They've had to get a new fridge because he could break into that. Loves apples. He would apparently jump up and knock all the apples off the tree and eat them. which doesn't sound too bad, but I think there are a few other problems. And, he would even jump on the trampoline, bounce up and down so he could get up to the apple tree.
That's one
and get
very
the apples.
clever dog. I think he deserves every morsel that he gets his hands on, or he gets his teeth on anyway.
Absolutely. So, kind of fun stories. And the last one I want to tell you about today is another good story. It's about a little kitten in Canada, and a rescue group found this little kid. It was dragging himself around because his back legs weren't working. Very tiny. They sent out a note on Facebook, and a teacher at a school passed it on to some students. 2 17-year-olds came up with a 3D plan for a special little wheelchair for the kitten and printed it on a 3D printer.
That's amazing.
So this is the future,
so
3D printing.
These are the 3D printers that people have been making guns with, unfortunately.
The bad ones.
But that's the bad side. But the good side is they've made a little trolley.
Yep. And we'll have some photos of that to add this, and even maybe a video that people can have a look at. Because it's good news and it's great. And these kids are going to go on, I'm sure, to find water on Mars, for example.
Well, they've been beaten to that. NASA's already done that. So they just did that last week, didn't they? So, look, if you've got a story, any good news stories, even not so good news stories, just that you want to alert people to something, just get in touch with us via the VETtalkradio.com.au website. Well, that's all we have time for this week on Vet Talk. Don't forget you can grab us, or grab any of our episodes.
Grab you, I don't know about me.
In the iTunes store, or just go to vettalkradio.com.au, click on the archives page for all our podcast shows and have a listen to what we've been doing. Thanks very much for joining us again. I'm Brian Pickering.
I'm Kay Brown.
And we'll hopefully see you again next week.
Or hear you, or you'll hear us.
Something like that.